Hey guys, tonight we wake up in a cold stone cell somewhere on Mount Athos, or maybe Constantinople, or a forgotten monastery nestled between cypress trees and responsibilities. The walls smell like beeswax and resignation. Your blanket is scratchy. Your knees already hurt, and you haven't stood up yet. This is the life of a Byzantine scribe. And you probably won't survive this, not from danger, but from parchment dust, repetition, and Brother Nikephoros asking too many questions about margins again. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there right now? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The bell rings, low, serious, and too early. You sit up slowly. Your bones click like loose tiles. A candle flickers on the ledge. You swing your legs over the edge of the cot, stand, and immediately regret it. You shuffle down the corridor, robe dragging slightly, sandals whispering over ancient floorboards. The smell hits first. Wax, ink, and a vague sour note from yesterday's cabbage. You follow it to the scriptorium, already lit by 3 sleepy candles and 1 overachiever. A mainstream historical fact. Byzantine monasteries were centers of manuscript production, especially between the 9th and 14th centuries. Scribes copied religious texts, commentaries, and occasionally science and classical works, using strict formatting and a complex set of decorative standards. You bow your head as you enter. It's not a rule. It's just easier than making eye contact before sunrise. Your desk is exactly as you left it, tilted, splattered, with a dry ink well and a tiny scrap of vellum curled at the edge like it's trying to escape. Here's your quirky tidbit. Scribes often left margin notes, known as colophons, to complain about the work. One famously reads, "This is the 5,000th line. My hand is tired. My eyes are dim. Pray for me." You sit. Stretch your fingers. Pick up your stylus. The page waiting for you is from the Psalms. Again, you love the Psalms. You also never want to see another verse about tents or enemies ever again. You begin with a line guide. Lightly. One crooked stroke can ruin a whole morning. You whisper a prayer to your ink pot, which responds with indifference. Brother Cosmos arrives, humming. He takes his place across the room and immediately begins coughing like it's an ancient rite. You glance at him. He grins. You do not return the favor. Outside, the sun is creeping up behind the cloister wall. The light will be perfect for copying in about 20 minutes. Until then, you rely on candle flicker and wishful accuracy. You pick up the parchment sheet, a freshly scraped goat skin that still smells like effort, and begin the outline. Just a few border marks, maybe a stylized vine, maybe a fish, definitely a halo. Someone's always getting a halo. The room is silent except for quills scratching, ink caps popping, and someone muttering, "Why is this pen cursed?" You sigh. You adjust your sleeve. And you write. Because illumination waits for no monk. You drag your stylus gently along the margin, carving the faintest of lines to guide your future ink. Straight, even, humble. Unlike Brother Gregor's page yesterday, which sloped like it was fleeing judgment. You adjust your grip, tilt the parchment a hair to the left, and trace again. This is the part they don't tell you about in sermons. Goatskin prep. You set your stylus down and reach for the next folio, a still curled sheet of parchment that smells unmistakably like its former owner. You stretch it across the board and begin smoothing it with the bone knife. Slow strokes, careful pressure, murmuring a verse from memory mostly to keep your brain from melting. A mainstream historical fact. Parchment used in Byzantine manuscripts was made from animal skins, usually calf, sheep, or goat, scraped, stretched, and dried under tension. Vellum was finer, reserved for deluxe commissions or imperial texts, while regular grade parchment made up the bulk of daily copying. You work the edge where the skin still curls a little. It resists. Of course it does. You press a little firmer and hear the whispering scrape that says it's finally agreeing with you. You set the skin in place, weigh it down with smooth stones, and reach for the next tool, your pumice block. Not for calluses, though those would be helpful, but to lightly roughen the surface. Ink needs something to cling to. You rub the block gently, circular patterns, dust lifts, you sneeze. Brother Cosmos sneezes back. You both pretend it didn't happen. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some scribes preferred to leave a small, visible edge of the hair side on the parchment, so readers could tell which side of the skin they were touching. Others inked over it out of spite. Marginally chaotic energy was not uncommon in manuscript culture. The parchment is ready now. You brush it once with your sleeve. Just habit. Just one last gesture before the words begin. You lay your ruler across the page. Draw horizontal lines, 5 to a column, 3 columns to the page, each one perfectly spaced, or close enough that you won't get scolded by the abbot. Again, you whisper your own internal mantra. Line, breathe, do not lean. Brother Theodosios passes behind you, glancing at your sheet with a sound halfway between approval and envy. You pretend not to notice. Now comes the edging. You take the stylus again and trace the border, 2 fine lines around the page, an open space in the top corner for illumination. You mark it with a faint cross, not sacred, just a placeholder. You sit back, crack your knuckles, reach for your ink. The pot is half dry. The lid was loose again. Probably Cosmos. You mutter a quiet apology to the Theotokos and reach for the water jar to thin it. A little. Just enough to wake it. Not so much it runs like panicked saints. It stirs. You smile, dip your pen, and begin the first letter. The B in blessed. Big, bold, not yet gilded but shaped to be. Curved like a bishop's staff, with just a hint of dramatic flair. The letters flow after that. A line from the psalm, half a page of clean, even rhythm. Your hand aches by line 8. You ignore it. You finish the first folio, just as the bell rings for 11. You stretch. Look down at your hand. It's inked, smudged, trembling slightly. You nod to it. Well done. Brother Cosmos stands. His page is upside down. You do not laugh. You rise from your bench. Leave your tools precisely arranged. Pen over pot, ruler aligned with the board, parchment tucked under weight. Outside, the corridor smells like bread, and your knees creak in perfect unison. You shuffle toward the dining hall with your hands still faintly stained from soot and walnut ink. The corridor is cool, the stone underfoot worn to a soft polish by centuries of monks trying to get to lunch before Brother Chrysostomos eats all the figs. Your stomach rumbles. You ignore it. You do not live for figs. You live for letters. Or so you tell yourself. The doorway arches ahead, low and narrow, forcing even the proudest scribe to duck humbly. You step through, bow slightly, and take your place at the long wooden bench beside Brother Gregor, who has already claimed the clean spoon. You get the second best one. Again. A mainstream historical fact. Byzantine monastic meals were simple and ritualized. Usually vegetarian, often built around lentils, onions, olives, and stale bread softened with broth. Meals were taken in silence, with one monk reading aloud from scripture or saints' lives, while the others chewed and tried to pretend it was butter. Today's fare is cabbage soup and bread. The bread is old. The cabbage is ambitious. You bow your head as the reading begins, something about humility and the proper fear of divine punctuation. Brother Cosmas shifts beside you, his knees knocking the table leg. You glance at him. He shrugs. You break your bread. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some scribes tucked spare parchment scraps into their sleeves and copied interesting phrases during meals using bits of charcoal. This was technically frowned upon, especially when the phrases included lines like, "Brother Leo eats faster than Grace." You sip your soup, which tastes mostly of yesterday. That's fine. You've copied entire Gospels that felt the same. The reader stumbles on a difficult name, an 8th century saint with too many vowels. No one corrects him. It would take until Vespers. You finish your meal slowly, savoring the last warm spoonfuls more out of principle than pleasure. The bell rings again. You rise. The bowls are cleaned, the benches scraped back, the crumbs swept into one tidy pile that Brother Gregor insists is a sign of efficient grace. You return to the scriptorium. Your parchment is still there, waiting, patient, silently judging your line work. You sit, dip your pen. The ink has thickened slightly while you were away. You add a few drops of water, whisper a line from the Psalms. Begin again. You outline a header in crimson, a marginally expensive color made from ground cochineal. It smells faintly like vinegar. You use it sparingly, like someone borrowing spices during a fast. The letters curl under your hand. The glory in glory be to the Father arches too far left. You scratch your beard. Pretend you meant it. You make a note to add gold later. Just a fleck. Just enough to catch the candlelight during reading. Outside, a wind stirs the trees beyond the cloister wall. Leaves rustle like parchment too close to the fire. You hear someone sneeze. Inside, it's just you, the letter forms, and the long silence between strokes. You press forward. A few more lines. A slight smudge. You wipe it gently with wool. The ink blots. You frown. Add a decorative leaf around it. Salvation through style. The bell rings for terse. You don't stop. Just one more column. One more verse. One more breath in the long rhythm of script and soup and silent complaint. You're halfway through the 4th column when your pen catches on a fiber in the parchment and snags, releasing a small burst of ink right in the middle of the word mercy. Irony, thick and black, spreads like a blot of cosmic humor. You stare at it. The word is ruined. The line is unsalvageable. You close your eyes, breathe in through your nose, and let it go. Divine forgiveness may be infinite. Vellum? Not so much. You reach for the knife, the thin one, sharpened just enough to scrape mistakes without scraping your patience raw. Carefully, you begin peeling the top layer of skin from the goat skin, lifting the ink blot with practiced precision. The scrape sings a soft whisper across the page. You try not to enjoy it. A mainstream historical fact. Byzantine scribes used small curved knives to correct errors, gently scraping the parchment to remove ink. Vellum was durable enough for this, but repeated scrapes could wear thin spots or introduce warps. Some scribes left margin notes when scraping failed. Forgive this blot. I was tired. You finish the scrape. It's not perfect, but it's clean. You recopy the word in smaller letters, less flourish, more humble. The irony is preserved. Then it's time for gold. You reach for the gilder's kit, a box of worn brushes, a square of leather, and a packet of gold leaf that flutters at the slightest breath. You hold your breath. Even your thoughts tiptoe. You dip your brush into the bowl, the red clay base that anchors the gold, and apply it with careful taps to the letter G. It glistens wetly, waiting. You slide the leaf onto a scrap of parchment. Then, slowly, you transfer it to the waiting curve. It clings. You press it down with a burnisher. It glows. You exhale. Here's your quirky tidbit. Scribes often inhaled gold dust when working with leaf, and one marginal note from an 11th century manuscript reads, "Too much breath. Glittered for days." You finish the gilding on the word glory, then run your brush along the arch of a stylized vine. You lean back. The letter gleams. It may not be holy, but it's certainly shiny. Brother Cosmos groans audibly at his desk, mutters something about slippery ink and vengeful psalms. You glance over. He's somehow drawn a halo on the wrong end of a lamb. You offer him a sympathetic shrug. He offers you a smudged eyebrow. You both return to work. The light through the scriptorium window shifts, casting slanted bars across your desk. Dust drifts through it like forgotten thoughts. You finish the page. 3 columns, 47 lines, 6 initials. 1 smudge hidden under a fig leaf motif. You let the ink dry. Carefully. This is not the time for sneezes. You set the folio on the drying shelf, angled, clean, untouched. You say a quick prayer over it. Not for content, for survival. You mark the next sheet in the stack. More psalms, more margins, more chances to practice patience disguised as art. Your fingers ache. Your back hums with warning. You stretch once, hear your spine answer with a quiet Amen. Then you sit again, dip your pen, and whisper the first letter into existence. The pen glides a little more willingly now, the ink having settled just enough into that sweet spot between syrup and silk. You guide it along the newly prepared sheet, forming tight, consistent uncials, each curve a miniature prayer, each line a negotiation between divine clarity and mortal wrist fatigue. Your hand cramps slightly on the downstroke of a particularly long E. You pause, flex your fingers, and shake them beneath the desk where Brother Cosmos can't see. The letters continue, carefully, reluctantly, elegantly. The margin is still empty. You consider adding a small leaf, nothing dramatic, just a sprig of decorative humility. You draw it with 4 quick strokes. You smile, then add a second one, not for symmetry, just for company. A mainstream historical fact. Byzantine manuscripts are known for their subtle, sometimes humorous marginalia, small decorative elements, miniature animals, or unexpected commentary tucked beside the sacred lines. While Western manuscripts favored dramatic dragons and jokes about bishops, Byzantine monks preferred understated flora and polite theological inside jokes. You continue copying from the Gospel of Matthew, line after line, a clean pace. You correct 1 letter midway by lifting it with a drop of milk, dabbing the spot with a scrap of cotton. It works. Mostly. You lean back for a moment, letting your eyes rest on the high beams of the scriptorium roof. Someone carved a fish into the wood long ago. No one's admitted to it. You sip from your water jar. It tastes slightly of ink. You don't mind. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some monks chewed fennel or licorice root while writing to keep their breath steady and hands calm. One chronicler complained that the entire scriptorium smelled like anise and anxiety. You reach for the red ink next, not for corrections, for rubrics, little headings, notes in the margin, capital introductions, a ribbon of authority through the black sea of letters. You write the title of the next section in red, a single word, parabole. You add a small frame, a vine in the corner, an open fig at the base. Brother Cosmos scoffs behind you. That fig again? You glance over. It's symbolic. Of what? Overripe theology? You ignore him. The fig stays. You continue with the next verse. Then another, then another. Your pen starts to drag. You dip it again. The ink is running low. You scrape the last of the soot from the bottle with a bone stirrer, then mix in a bit of wine and a pinch of gum arabic. It thickens. You test a stroke. Perfect. You glance at the drying shelf. Your earlier folio still rests there. No beetles, no unexpected smudges, no divine interruptions. You bow your head in thanks. The bell rings. Finally, midday. You close your inkpot with a slow twist. Set your pen across the top. You stand. Your knees click again. Brother Cosmos mutters something about ink being easier than soup. You smile, because soon there will be soup. And then, more psalms. The refectory smells like cabbage again, a scent that's not offensive so much as omnipresent, like humility, or Brother Cosmos's complaints. You file in with the others, hands still faintly ink-stained, and take your seat at the long wooden table under the ever-watching gaze of the faded fresco above the hearth. Today's meal is lentils, bread, and the faint hope that someone brought salt. You eat slowly, chewing through theology and legumes in equal measure. The monk assigned to reading today has a clear voice, but a habit of dramatically pausing in the wrong places, which turns even the most devout writings into unintentional poetry. And the Lord said unto them, mysterious pause, go forth. You exchange a glance with Brother Gregor, who is trying not to smile into his bread. A mainstream historical fact. Meals in Byzantine monasteries were usually eaten in silence, with scripture or hagiography read aloud from a pulpit. Talking was only permitted on certain feast days or if your table neighbor was actively on fire, which rarely happened, though soup accidents were not unheard of. You finish your bowl, the lentils forming a small mosaic in the bottom. You consider leaving a message in crumbs, decide against it. You rise with the rest, the scraping of benches a communal hymn of digestion. Back in the scriptorium, the light is better. Midday sun streams through the high windows, catching the gold leaf on the drying rack and turning it into something celestial. You squint. One folio is shining more than the rest. Probably not divine. Probably just yesterday's overzealous gilding. You take your place. Your tools are still exactly where you left them. The ink is thick again. The parchment is dry. The fig motif is still perfect. You return to your work. The next page is from Luke. You draw the initial I, large and wide, wrapping it in a border of olive leaves. You add a small sparrow in the corner. Not because the text mentions birds, just because you like them. Here's your quirky tidbit. While formal illustrations in Byzantine manuscripts were deeply symbolic and often prescribed, some scribes left behind whimsical creatures, frogs in mitres, cats licking ink pots, saints holding oddly shaped bread loaves. One folio features a monk doodling another monk. The resemblance is reportedly suspiciously accurate. You trace the next line, the letters flowing more easily now. The rhythm returns. The scraping of your pen joins the soft sounds of other scribes nearby. The room hums with focus. The air smells like ink, beeswax, and just the faintest trace of burnt bread from the kitchen chimney. You reach for your red ink, highlight the title, add a tiny flame at the end. Just a flicker. Brother Cosmos snorts again. What's that supposed to be? A flame. It looks like an angry feather. You don't reply. You just keep writing, because anger fades. But parchment is forever. You pause just long enough to stretch your fingers and regret all your life choices that involve holding narrow sticks for 7 hours a day. Then back to it. Another sheet, another folio, another line from Luke reminding you that the kingdom of heaven is probably less interested in your line spacing than the abbot is. The afternoon light has shifted slightly, a little warmer now, a little more golden. It falls across your workbench like a benediction, highlighting the faintest flecks of ink on your sleeves. You brush them off, mostly to feel productive. You reach for the next sheet of parchment, a good one, thin, smooth, barely any blemishes. You whisper a thank you to the goat, which is what passes for professional courtesy. A mainstream historical fact, parchment was a precious commodity, and scribes learned to work around imperfections, holes, scars, or discoloration. Creative use of illustrations and border design often solved layout problems, turning flaws into features with a bit of leaf work and holy imagination. You begin again. The gospel continues. Jesus is still preaching. The disciples are still confused. The crowds are still large and metaphorical. You trace each line with care, each letter slowly pulled from the ether, like drawing thread through silence. Halfway through the page, the ink begins to thin again. You swirl the pot gently, watching the pigment settle like a storm in miniature. You add a drop of water, then another. Stir, tap, diploma. You write again. The S in sinners curls a little too playfully. You leave it. It's fine. You'll call it expressive orthodoxy. Here's your quirky tidbit. Many scribes developed their own stylistic quirks, small ways of forming letters that became a kind of signature. Some copied their own mistakes intentionally to keep the manuscript consistent. Or maybe just because change is hard when you're 83 lines into Leviticus. Brother Cosmas groans from across the room. He's hunched over his third attempt at a page header. His "the" looks like a duck, sneezing. You offer a kind look. He offers you a piece of hard bread in solidarity. You return to your sheet. Almost done. Just one final paragraph. One final line. You add a small vine in the lower margin, trailing gently toward the end, curling into a modest loop. You resist the temptation to add a snail. Barely. You blow gently across the page. The ink glistens. You stand, roll your shoulders, and place the new folio onto the drying rack with the others. Gold side up. Always gold side up. You turn back to your bench and realize your chair has developed a wobble. You press down experimentally. It creaks. You sigh. Then you carve a small wedge of parchment, fold it twice, and slide it under the offending leg. Problem solved. Mostly. The bell rings. Time for vespers. You cap your ink, tuck your pen into its slot, stand again. Your knees do the chorus they've rehearsed since matins. You follow the line of monks down the corridor, the scent of candle wax growing stronger with each step. You pass a window. Outside, the sky has gone pale blue and gold, like a very devout painting trying not to be too proud of itself. You smile and step into the chapel, where no one will notice the ink stain on your sleeve. The chapel is cooler than the scriptorium, the kind of still stone air that hugs your skin like a silent benediction. You step into line beside Brother Gregor, who smells faintly of wax and theological regret. The flickering candlelight warms the arches above, casting looping shadows like illuminated initials slowly unrolling across the ceiling. You bow. Take your seat. Try not to think about your back. Vespers begins. A chant, low and round, rises from the far end of the choir. You join in, letting your voice slip beneath the others like a line of ink beneath gold leaf. The words are familiar, half memorized, half mumbled, but they steady your breath the same way margin lines steady your pen. A mainstream historical fact. Monastic hours like Vespers were more than prayers. They were timekeepers. Chanted services structured the entire day, defining the tempo of labor, meals, and even illumination. A monk could map his life by the bells, each toll another invisible line on the scroll of time. Brother Cosmos sings too loudly. Again. His dominus always overshoots the pitch by just enough to be noticed. You don't correct him. You just hope he doesn't go for the high note in the next verse. You think about your page, the one drying right now, the gold vine curling down the margin, the way the G in glory turned out just right this time. You smile softly, even as your knees threaten mutiny. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some monks kept mental scores of their best letters. One 12th century colophon confessed, "The 5th letter of the 4th line. Perfect. The rest, may the Lord overlook." Artistic triumphs were sometimes as small as a well-formed curve. The chant flows on. Psalms, antiphons, a reading that sounds suspiciously like yesterday's. You don't mind. Familiarity is part of the rhythm. The abbot's voice is gentle. The incense drifts like punctuation through the air. You kneel once, then rise. Your knees groan in Latin. The candles flicker as the wind nudges the chapel's high windows. Someone's robe rustles just behind you, and a soft cough tries to pretend it didn't happen. Vespers ends. You file out slowly, your robe catching on the edge of the pew as it always does. You return to the cloister. The air outside is cooler now. Evening has settled in. The courtyard stones are cool to the touch, whispering the day's heat away into the night. You head back to the scriptorium. Not because you must, but because you're not quite done. You light a single lamp. Quietly. At your bench, your page is dried. It waits patiently, gold gleaming softly in the lamplight. You sit. Open your notebook, and write a single word beneath the folio. Finished. Then, with all the ceremony of a monk placing a jewel into the earth, you place the folio into its wrap, slide it into the waiting bundle, and tuck it into the archive shelf. You lean back, close your eyes for a moment, and let the silence settle. Outside, the sky shifts from deep blue to ink black. Inside, your pen finally rests. For now. The scent of drying ink and warm dust still clings to your sleeves as you return to the refectory for the evening meal. The benches have been reset, the candles trimmed, and the tablecloths, if you can call them that, gently shaken out and redraped like polite reminders that someone, somewhere, once, cared about wrinkles. You sit in your usual place between Brother Theodosios, who eats with methodical devotion, and Brother Cosmos, who eats like someone is threatening to take the bowl away at any moment. Tonight's supper is soup. Again. Cabbage, perhaps. Possibly turnip. Definitely warm. You lower your head for the blessing. The reader for tonight's meal is Brother Malchus, whose voice wobbles slightly when he hits long Greek names. He begins reading a commentary on Gregory of Nazianzus. Within 3 sentences, someone sighs audibly. No one confesses. A mainstream historical fact. Monks in Byzantine monasteries were expected to eat in silence, with readings continuing from earlier services or taken from patristic writings. The emphasis wasn't on enjoyment, but on nourishment and humility. Also, talking during soup increased the odds of theological arguments and spilled lentils. You sip your spoonful slowly. It's not great. It's also not bad. It's simply what it is. Much like most of monastic life. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some monasteries kept complaint books, where monks could log frustrations anonymously. These often included comments about food like, soup too clear, saw my reflection, repented. One entry read, bread hard enough to be scripture. Brother Cosmos elbows you. Better than yesterday, he whispers, completely ignoring the silence rule. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs and dips his bread. You chew thoughtfully, staring at the waxy flicker of a nearby candle. You consider whether this evening's highlight will be finishing that marginal illustration you started 3 weeks ago, an angel shaped suspiciously like a duck. The meal ends with a final prayer. You rise, stomach full enough, thoughts half-formed, ankles slightly more swollen than ideal. You step into the corridor and feel the stone beneath your feet cooling for the night. The breeze drifting through the courtyard smells faintly of sage and dust. You return to the scriptorium once more, not to work, but to tidy. You cap the ink pot, fold the page cloths, blow out the candles one by one. In the fading glow, you see the stack of finished folios from this week, all bundled, pressed, waiting for the binding room. You run your hand gently along the top. Each page is a breath, each line a step, each dot of gold a flicker of quiet hope. You pause before the door, glancing once more at the benches, the tools, the smudged blotter page. Someone forgot to clean. You smile, then step back into the cloister. The stars are out, and your bed, for once, might forgive your spine. You return to your cell with a candle stub and sore thumbs, your robe tugging slightly at your knees like it's trying to sit down before you. The stone walls flicker with light as you pass, each doorway familiar by shape, scent, and the small quirks of creaking hinges and uneven floors. Your cell is exactly as you left it, bare, blessed, and just big enough for a cot, a stool, and the illusion of privacy. You set the candle on the small ledge near your bed, watching the flame settle. It wobbles, then rights itself. You understand the feeling. You sit on the cot and rub your hands, joints whispering of every letter you traced today. The gold, the ink, the fig leaf that absolutely wasn't a metaphor. Your back protests. Your feet pretend not to know you. You breathe out slowly. A mainstream historical fact. Byzantine monks lived modestly, sleeping in small cells, often no more than 5 or 6 feet wide. The rule of St. Basil emphasized humility, quietude, and restfulness, though rest was a relative concept when your mattress was straw and your neighbor snored in Greek. You unfasten your belt, fold your robe, sit in silence, then remember, you still have 1 quill left to trim. With a sigh that sounds older than your lungs, you reach into the satchel beside your cot and pull out the last feather. Goose, good spine, slightly frayed tip. You light the small blade and begin trimming. The room smells faintly of wax, paper, and you. Here's your quirky tidbit. Quill trimming was so personal that some scribes refused to let others touch their knives. One colophon reads, "This pen wrote 90 pages. May the hand that sharpened it be remembered." Another says, "This knife is cursed. Use at peril." You finish the quill, blow gently across the nib, and test it on a scrap of cloth. Smooth. You set it down beside your inkhorn and whisper a prayer you made up long ago. May your lines stay straight, and your letters know their place. You pull the blanket over your legs and lie back, staring at the ceiling beam you've stared at 1,000 times. It still looks like it might fall one day. You've come to terms with that. You close your eyes, then open them again, and light the candle once more. One last thing. You reach beneath your cot and pull out a folded parchment. Unfinished, uncommissioned, unofficial. Your own copywork. Not gospel, not saints. Just verses you like. Just borders you find restful. You smooth the page, pick up the new quill, and write 1 line. Then stop. Then 1 more. You smile. Just a little. Then blow out the candle for good, and let the darkness settle like ink across vellum. The candle's smoke curls into the ceiling as you lie there, the weight of the day pressing you gently into your straw mattress. Not hard, not heavy, just firm enough to remind you that the floor is closer than you'd prefer. You shift. The straw crinkles. One piece pokes your ribs with particular confidence. You sigh, then chuckle softly. Tomorrow, maybe, you'll reshuffle the stuffing. Maybe. The wind outside nudges your shutter. Once. Twice. It doesn't want to come in. Just to say goodnight. You pull the blanket higher, tucking it beneath your chin, the way you've done since you were a novice, and still thought the Psalms would memorize themselves. You listen. Down the hall, someone coughs. Not dramatically. Just enough to confirm that Brother Cosmos is still breathing, and probably still dreaming about ink pots. A mainstream historical fact. Monks followed a nightly routine that included Compline, the final prayer before bed, after which the monastery fell into silence until morning. No talking, no footsteps unless necessary, just sleep, snoring, and the occasional creaking beam. You try to remember the line you copied just before Vespers. Something about the lilies of the field, or maybe the fig trees again. It's all a soft blur now, like a border sketch unfinished in the corner of your thoughts. You stretch one foot. The other foot grumbles. You shift again. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some monks left messages to their future selves in marginal notes. Not theological insights, just reminders like, don't forget your knife, or fix the quill with the crooked tip. One scribe even wrote, I slept here. The floor is a lie. You feel sleep approaching, slow, careful, like a scribe tiptoeing through a line of wet ink. You welcome it. The parchment of your day is full, words written, margins drawn, mistakes made and mended. And now, just rest. The silence of the monastery wraps around you like a soft script. Outside, the wind moves on to other windows. Inside, you finally let your breath settle. Ink still under your nails. Peace in your spine. And the quiet hum of another page, waiting for tomorrow. You wake just before the bell. That strange monastery magic where your body, trained by countless dawns, knows exactly when to return from sleep. You blink into the darkness, feel the chill on your cheeks, and listen. Silence. Not emptiness, but anticipation. A silence waiting for the first chime of the day. And then, there it is. One deep toll. You sit up, slowly, carefully. The blanket slides away and the cold greets you like an old friend with very poor circulation. You stretch once, back cracking gently, legs reluctant but loyal. You dress in practiced motions, robe, belt, scarf, ink-stained sleeves, and step into your sandals, which, against all odds, are still warm from where you placed them near the shutter gap. A mainstream historical fact. Byzantine monks lived by the rule of Saint Basil, which emphasized a balance of prayer, work, and study. Early rising was essential, with matins, or orthros, prayed before sunrise, followed by morning readings and labor, including hours spent copying or illuminating manuscripts by flickering light. You walk through the corridor with candle in hand, shadows dancing ahead like saints late for their own feast day. The scriptorium is cold. Of course it is. The windows leak a breeze that smells faintly of pine, dust, and responsibility. You light the first lamp. The others flicker to life one by one, casting their glow across the desks, the ink pots, the drying pages, the bundle of parchments wrapped neatly in cloth. You take your place, unwrap your tools, test your pen. The nib is still sharp from yesterday. Miracle of miracles. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some monks swore by particular quill types. Goose for clarity, crow for flourish, swan for high holidays. One scribe even claimed owl feathers give dreams in the margins. His pages were never dull. You retrieve today's sheet from the cabinet, a new gospel folio, pre-ruled, awaiting its first word. You draw a breath, dip your pen, and begin again. This time, the Book of Acts. The ink flows easily today. The first line curves in steady arcs. You hum softly under your breath. Not a chant, just rhythm. Even the letters have music. You reach the bottom of the page as the light shifts. Dawn. You glance out the window. The courtyard is blue-gray, dew catching in tiny glints across the stones. You pause, warm your fingers on the lamp base, and return to your script. A new day, a new text. Same hand, same heart. The morning ripens into mid-morning, and your parchment stack ripens with it. 1, 2, now 3 completed pages laid gently on the drying rack, their edges curling just enough to remind you that goatskin is never quite as flat as you think it is. You reach for your next folio, only to find your ink has begun to settle again. The surface has formed that thin skin that always makes you hesitate. Do you stir, or do you pray it blends? You stir. The brush of the wooden stick against the ceramic pot sounds like a monk gently disagreeing with your aesthetic choices. You stir anyway. A mainstream historical fact. Scribes worked with handmade ink, often derived from soot, gallnuts, and wine, or vinegar. These mixtures had to be stirred regularly, or else separation would occur, resulting in inconsistent color, poor flow, or tragic blotting. No one likes tragic blotting. You test the ink on a scrap. It's smooth today. You nod. Begin again. The next page is narrative. A miracle story. You always like those. They flow easier. Fewer lists. Fewer names with 3 silent syllables. You embellish the M at the top. Add a pair of wings curling off the edges, just subtle enough to pass inspection. You think about making them pigeon wings as a joke. Then you remember the time you got scolded for drawing a lion with a slightly smug expression. You ink the lines slowly, evenly. You hear Brother Cosmos sneeze. You hold your breath. No blot. You exhale. Here's your quirky tidbit. Manuscript drying racks were positioned near but never too close to heat. Sudden warmth could warp the parchment or cause the ink to bubble. One monastery reportedly used a system of suspended strings and gentle fans, operated by novices with more time than upper body strength. You finish the page. The margins look clean. The spacing holds. The red header shines faintly. You place it gently on the top rack. Whisper a small prayer to St. Catherine, patroness of copyists. She hasn't answered you directly, but you suspect she's amused by the snail in the psalm margins. You clean your pen, cap the ink, and stretch. Your arms ache. Your shoulders protest. Your neck threatens mutiny. You get up and walk once around the cloister garden. The air is clearer than yesterday. The herbs wave gently in their beds. Brother Gregor is muttering at the beehives again. You nod to him. He doesn't nod back. The bees require his full attention. You return inside just in time to hear the binding bell. 3 short chimes. Binding time. You sigh, because the scriptorium is quiet. But the bindery is chaos. And you're about to find out who dropped a quire in the dust. Again. The bindery smells different than the scriptorium. Less ink, more glue, more dust, more hope. You enter cautiously, as one does when approaching a room full of fragile things held together by string and faith. The brothers are already at work. One is sewing folios with tight, irritated motions. Another is arguing with a length of thread. Brother Cosmos is somehow both threading a needle and muttering prayers for patience at the same time. You take your assigned bundle, a freshly completed gospel set, neatly wrapped in cloth, corners still crisp, the gold just dry enough to pretend it won't smudge. You unwrap it gently. Beneath the fabric, your pages, your lines, your vines and initials, and that one fig leaf you're not entirely sure. The abbot noticed. You stack the folios into proper order, checking catchwords at the bottom corners. Logos, epistolae, metanoia. They line up, almost perfectly. A mainstream historical fact. Byzantine books were assembled in choirs, small gatherings of folded folios sewn together, then bound between wooden boards covered in leather or decorated fabric. Binding was a skilled task and a nerve-wracking one. A sneeze, misaligned thread, or poorly dried glue could undo weeks of work. You press the folios onto the sewing frame, thread your needle, and begin. Up through the fold, over the cord, down again. Tug gently. Repeat. Your fingers are calloused in all the right places. Mostly. The thread holds firm. The paper flexes slightly. You hum again, this time a little louder. Cosmos glares. No chanting in the bindery. It's not chanting, you reply. It's preventative cursing. He doesn't laugh. You continue stitching. The spine tightens. The quires flatten. You pause only once. When the thread snags on the corner of a gilded K, you untangle it with exaggerated care, aware that the last time someone tugged too hard, half a psalm went sideways. Here's your quirky tidbit. One preserved Byzantine codex has a margin note from a frustrated binder. The glue is weak. The folios rebel. Lord, give strength to my knots. Another says simply, sneezed. Begin again. You finish the binding stitch. Tie it off. Check the tension. It holds. You smile, small, but sincere. You help Cosmos align the spine boards, thick oak, slightly warped, covered in softened leather. He trims the edges. You hold the clasp. The glue is warm. The pressure weights are set. The codex is complete. Almost. Just the title to emboss. You prepare the iron stamp, warmed gently by the brazier in the corner. You align it carefully with the front board. Then, just as you press, someone sneezes, hard, a wet, determined sneeze. You jump. The stamp slips. The title now reads Gopsel instead of Gospel. You stare. Brother Cosmos sighs. You say nothing for a full 10 seconds. Then, calmly, you carve a small cross under the word. This one is humble, you declare. Cosmos mutters, it's a gopsel of humility. You agree. You clean the stamp, wrap the codex, and place it gently on the shelf. It leans slightly. Perfectly imperfect. You walk the finished codex down the long hallway to the library, arms wrapped tightly around it like a child or a secret. The leather binding is still warm to the touch. The title, flawed as it may be, shining faintly with just a hint of holy irony. The library isn't large. It never is. Just a single vaulted room, high shelves of cedar and oak, the faint smell of glue and thyme hanging between rows. You open the door gently. It creaks, as always, like an old man being asked one more favor. You step inside. The light filters through the upper windows, thin and reverent. You walk past titles you know by heart. The Ladder of Divine Ascent, the Lives of Saints, the writings of Basil, Gregory, Chrysostom. You pause at one shelf where your hand has written more lines than it can count. You find the space, slide the codex in. It fits. Not snug, not loose. Just enough room to breathe. A mainstream historical fact. Byzantine monastic libraries house their manuscripts in simple wooden shelves, often wrapped in cloth for protection. Manuscripts weren't sorted by author or genre, but by use. Lectionaries, gospels, patristic works, each stored according to the rhythm of the liturgical year. You step back. Look at the spine. Gopsel, still smiling. You bow your head slightly. Not a full bow, just a nod of acknowledgement. To the book, to the process, to the hand that wrote it, and the hand that will someday read it. You leave the library slowly, walking past the quiet shelves, the neat bundles of string-tied folios, the notes left hanging for the next scribe to finish what someone else began. Here's your quirky tidbit. In one monastery, monks placed their favorite books on the highest shelf, not to hide them, but to keep them closer to heaven. Another scribe wrote, "May the reader's eyes find what mine once sought." You return to your cell. Sit for a moment. Hands still, heart calm. You stare at your desk, clean now, wiped of ink and ambition. Tomorrow, another parchment, another vine, another chance to get a G exactly right. You lie down, the stone wall cool beside you. You listen to the monastery settling around you, the slow groan of beams, the hush of sandaled feet outside, the whisper of someone turning a page you once copied. And somewhere in the distance, a bell prepares for its next song. When done, and now, with the ink dry and the parchment tucked into the shelf, let your breath settle like dust on a quiet folio. You've copied your lines. You've trimmed your quill. You've gilded letters that will gleam long after your candle burns down. Let that rhythm stay with you now. Each breath, a page. Each moment, a line. Let the scriptorium fade away, not in silence but in peace. The peace of routine, of repetition, of letters drawn by tired hands and hopeful hearts. You don't need to hold the scrolls anymore. You don't need to carve the border or finish the flourish. The text continues, even if your eyes close. So breathe. Let your spine ease. Let your hands rest. Let your thoughts quiet, like the drying rack at midnight. The abbey sleeps. The shelves hold their secrets. The pages you've made wait for other hands, other eyes, other dreams. You are finished. For now. The bell is not rung. The ink has not spilled. The vine has curled just enough. Let the glow of gold leaf soften to memory. Let your thoughts drift, slow and sweet, like candle smoke curling into the night. Now, dim the lights. And sleep well. End of script. Sweet dreams.